Jack Ebling here with Dan Kilbridge at Spartan Stadium. Press coverage for October 19th, 2010. Michigan State about ready to leave the state of Michigan for the first time, Dan.
Getting ready to venture out into the great unknown for this year at least, so that'll change the routine a little bit, but the plan stays the same, just win the game on Saturday.
I guess the goal is for the 8th straight game that Michigan State would have more fans in the stands at the end of the game than the opponent.
Well, they've always drawn a pretty good crowd at Northwestern with those Chicago grads, and I can only imagine this year there's going to be even more. I've heard some estimations as high as almost 40-60 splits, so it should be an interesting afternoon in Evanston.
Well, it's always an interesting afternoon when Michigan State and Northwestern play, and quarterback for Northwestern, Dan Persa, presents some problems, and Michigan State talking about some other problems today. Mark Dantonio addressing the psychological aspect of being number 7 in the BCS poll.
Right, you become the hunted, and there's obviously much more to play for each week, and they're entering uncharted territory, so to speak, as he mentioned. So that's something you just have to keep an eye on. You don't really know where you stand at this point because there's so much still you have to find out about certain teams in the Big Ten and outside of the Big Ten. I think with Michigan State right now, Mark Dantonio just has to remind these guys, like he said today, you have to remember where we came from,
right?
And really just focus on one game at a time. I hate repeating that over and over again this season, but as they win each game, that really does become even more important.
A couple of very interesting quotes from Mark Dantonio. I thought it was intriguing that he said, let's not get too big of a head and think we're all that. We're not there yet. Obviously a work in progress.
That's the mentality you need to have to be a championship team where nothing is given to you, even though some of these games coming up may look like wins. Both the home games certainly do. You really can't look past anyone, and that's something Dantonio emphasized over and over again today, saying, they've got players who can make plays, and these games are so close that you really can't just throw your head in there and expect to win every Saturday. So I think that focus and that intensity is going to be there in practice just as it needs to be.
It looks as if the Spartans will be without Chris L. Rucker again. Certainly that seems to be the plan. We'll know a little bit more later this week with some legal proceedings. But what about health-wise? How is this football team?
I think they're pretty good right now. I mean, you look at some guys who got banged up on Saturday, Jarrell Worthy, Kirk Cousins, maybe some guys still banged up on the defensive line. But overall, I think this team has to be very happy where it's at health-wise. They really haven't had any crippling injuries, so to speak, to this point, and have pretty much come out okay.
The depth with this Michigan State team is different from past years. You could match up the top 22 of Michigan State against Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, and there wouldn't be that big a difference. But when you got into the second 22 and certainly the third 22, it was an entirely different ballgame. In terms of the depth of this squad, what is the biggest position where you would be concerned about injuries?
I think it'd be quarterback is number one. Kirk Cousins obviously is the guy who has to lead this team with Maxwell. He hasn't got a lot of experience, but I'd say the position unit overall would be the offensive line because they were kind of banged up last year. They had to switch their rotation a little bit, and I think that really hurt them. This year, they've had the luxury of throwing the same 5 guys out there each and every week, and I think that's been a big plus for them, just having that balance on the offensive line each week.
We have seen on the defensive front, with Jarrell Worthy, you mentioned, Kevin Pickelman and Blake Treadwell have had issues. But they've had other people step forward, and France has gotten a little bit of time. And every time you get a situation where a guy has to come forward, as in Darquez Denard's case, when you get other people back, you're stronger as a result of it. And I think that's going to help Michigan State the second half of the season.
Absolutely. You can never get enough guys enough reps. And you've seen what they've done on the defensive line with rotating 8 guys at times. And you saw it pay off at the end of the game last week with Golston getting the sack. Tyler Hoover had, I think, his best game as a Spartan. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So really, once you start to build that depth, that's when you can start to build a program. It has to start with getting more players and having experienced backups.
A couple of very interesting statistics. Michigan State now 17th in the nation in pass efficiency defense. Think about that. They were 90th in the country a year ago, and Michigan State had 3 interceptions in Big Ten play last year. They've had 3 in each of the last 2 games.
It's been remarkable, the turnaround. I don't think anyone could have predicted it, even though Harlan Barnett said in camp he really liked his unit. He kind of took that with a grain of salt just based on what we saw last year. But they've been outstanding. They've all made plays on the ball. They've been good in coverage. You don't see a lot of mistakes, a lot of breakdowns. And they'll have a good test in Northwestern. Their quarterback completes a whole lot of passes. He's got a great completion percentage, and I think that'll be the matchup to watch on Saturday.
Should be a lot of fun for fans of offensive football. Jack Ebling here with Dan Kilbridge at Spartan Stadium. Press coverage after Mark Dantonio's presser for the Northwestern game.